Minister of Public Enterprises Pravin Gordhan and Treasury have met with the heads of major banks and asset managers to appeal for help to nurse SOEs back to health. Some SOEs are in more dire straits than others. Why would our banks want to take on the risk? Coovadia, MD of the Banking Association of South Africa, joins us for more on the stance the banks will be taking on this request. Cass, thanks so much for joining us this evening. So we've had Minister Gordhan and Treasury lodge their appeal with major banks and asset managers, the indication being that banks have not yet restored lending, even with all the reorganization that is happening at South Africa's state-owned enterprises. Where do the banking industry's major concerns still lie?
Well, firstly, just to say that the meeting that we had last week, Tuesday, was to explore how, as the financial sector, which is both banks and the long-term lenders, actually, the assurance companies and fund managers, can work with government to actually see how we can help to restore the credibility of the SOEs and get them into a sustainable position. What we agreed is that some progress has been made. Some of the governance structures have been addressed. Some management issues have been addressed. But we all agreed that it's still a long way to go before we can undo the damage that's been done in the last 10 years or so. And what we suggested and what we agreed is that we pull a team together to look at what the immediate funding needs are and see how we can work with government to assist with those in a way that enables the financial sector to come to the party, but without putting any systemic risk into the sector itself. So we'd have to work with the government to see what sort of, what way the government can underwrite any of the lending that the banks do to some of the SOEs that are in financial distress. We took this view because we believe that, firstly, some of the strategic SOEs are critical to the country, critical for economic growth and stability. Others need to be brought to a stage where some options can be put on the table about how to restructure them. And so we believe that this is necessary to do. We will play whatever role we can play without risking depositor funds in any way. But we do recognize it's an abnormal situation. It needs some creative thinking, and that's what we're doing. We're putting some teams of good technical people together to put different options on the table.
Yes, I want to pick up on something that you've highlighted there, that the sector's chimed in offering solutions on the actual restructuring of state-owned companies. What would make them more credit-worthy as far as restructuring is concerned?
Well, look, we just met last week, Tuesday. I had the first meeting of a team on Friday last week, and we're doing some work with Treasury and public enterprises to look at different institutions, to look at where each institution is, and then to look at different options. I think it's early days yet for us, for certainly the industry, to make any definitive comments, and it's not for the industry to make those comments. And we're working with government, and we will give input to government on what our thinking is, and ultimately it's up to government to decide how these state-owned institutions are restructured and what the critical issues are.
Absolutely.
So I think that I just like to appeal that we just met less than a week ago. We had the first meeting of the group on Friday. We've allocated some work to do, and the work will inform ongoing interaction between us and the government, which would then put some options on the table.
Of course, that's understandable, Cass. I asked the question, though, because one wonders if you see the workforce buying into what would essentially be private sector strategies in turning these ships around. And I ask because after the Eskom strike last week, one immediately picks up the distrust union members have of what it's going to do to turn things around. And chief amongst the concerns are job cuts in a bid to bring down costs.
Yeah, look, and I think that we obviously, I can't comment on where the unions are at, but I think that we all, both, government, business, and labor, I think need to recognize that we find ourselves in a situation after the last 10 years or so where we're all going to have to make trade-offs of some kind. And we're all going to accept that we're working in an abnormal situation. And before we can get back to any semblance of normality, we're going to have some sort of a transition period during which we're going to have to do things a bit differently.
Yeah.
So that's the bottom line, and that it's within that context and in that spirit that we engage in government on this, and government is engaging us on this.
In the interim, Cass, as you say, this is going to be quite a long drawn process. In the interim, having met with the financial sector, what are some of the funding mechanisms that have been offered up?
Well, this is exactly what I'm saying. We're going to work on those mechanisms.
Okay.
We accept that we need to come to the party to assist in the short term with some of the more distressed state-owned institutions. I think we need to work with government to identify exactly which of those are, what the state of distress is. We need to then look at how we actually assist without bringing risk into the system, what sort of underwriting mechanisms government can put into place. All of those things will have to be discussed in the next 2 weeks or so.
So, Cass, has funding been prioritized based on the economic importance of the respective SOE?
Well, there'll be prioritization of that. There are some SOEs like ESCOM, for instance, that need a medium to longer term approach, and that, will have to have a different approach to, say, SAA or SAS. Mm-hmm. And we'll... one of the teams is working on looking at the institutions, prioritizing them, seeing which are short-term interventions, which are medium to long-term interventions, and all of that work is being done currently.
Well, Cass, we'll be keeping an eye on developments as they unfold. Thanks so much for having joined us on the line this evening. Cass Coovadia is, of course, MD of the Banking Association of South Africa.